to Jay. Fantastic story in the Wall Street Journal today, which is a profile, in effect, of the great Iranian spymaster. Are we making too much out of this, or is this guy really, really smart when it comes to kind of confounding America in the Mideast?
Well, I think he's proven pretty adept in places like Iraq and Syria. I mean, you talk to U.S. military officials, and most of the IEDs that were killing U.S. soldiers inside Iraq were coming from Iran, and General Soleimani was seen as sort of the architect of this bleed campaign. But even far afield in recent months, from the alleged plot to kill a Saudi ambassador in Washington to some of these bombings against Israeli diplomats in countries like Thailand and India, they believe that Quds Force was involved. These plots in Thailand and other places weren't exactly successful. So it seems like General Soleimani might be more adept when he's operating closer to the home. But the Quds Force and the Iranian intelligence and operations are definitely a global issue.
Right. And has this individual had this post for quite some time, Mr. Soleimani, or General Soleimani, or is this a relatively recent development? I mean, have we known about him and his role for a long time, and why are we all of a sudden discovering more?
I think we did. He took over the Quds Force, which is basically the overseas arm of the Revolutionary Guards in the late 90s. So he's been there for a while, and he was a war hero during the 80 to 88 Iran-Iraq war. But it's really been since the U.S. presence in Afghanistan and Iraq sort of put the American forces on both sides of Iran, and also since this Arab Spring broke out and the U.S. and the Iranians are really sort of competing for influence across the region, with the Iranian ally, President Bashar al-Assad, in Syria sort of on the ropes, and then our allies, whether in Bahrain or Mubarak in Egypt, these guys have also either fallen or under extreme pressure. So you see much more sort of chess playing now between the Iranians and the Americans and their allies for influence as all these regimes have come under pressure over the last year.
Now, is Mr. Soleimani, or General Soleimani, is he a protected diplomatic personality or individual? What I mean by that is, I understand that he flew to Syria a couple of months ago. He's effectively arming the Assad regime against internal dissension or strife in Syria. If he traveled can he travel to a place like London or Paris, or is he kind of persona non grata in the West?
He is. I mean, he's on U.S. sanctions list. I believe he's on EU sanctions list. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, in Western capitals, he would definitely have trouble. And most of these trips he's going to, whether into Iraq or into Syria, it's pretty covert stuff. I mean, the Americans are actively trying to basically impede any air or maritime traffic into Syria right now. We've seen the Turks ground some Iranian airplanes. We've sanctioned Iranian airlines and ships. So his ability to get around outside of, Iraq, Syria, some of these places is, I would assume, pretty difficult these days.
Now, final question, Jay. Is he perceived as, quote unquote, successful at what he does? And what I mean by that is, look, I mean, the Arab Spring has happened despite whatever Mr. Soleimani's efforts might have been or might not have been. The uprising in Syria is a real problem for the Assad regime, and Iraq more or less has kind of moved in a positive, kind of democratic direction. This all in spite of General Soleimani's efforts. Can we deem him a success at what he does, or is he in fact a failure?
Well, I think in Iraq, you'd argue the Iranians have been pretty effective. I mean, you have a Shiite government in Baghdad now that is very close with Iran on a number of issues, and the U.S. military presence is gone. So on a net, I would say Iraq is now a much better position in the Iranian view than it was before. You're right. I mean, if Assad falls, it would be a huge blow to the Iranians. But he's also, people were saying last summer they thought Assad's days were numbered, and
right.
You don't hear that anymore.
Right.
You hear this thing is going to be a long slog, and the Iranians and the Russians have been, very aggressive in keeping the arms flowing and that. So I guess in some ways it's an open question.
Open
I
question.
think, you know, the Arab Spring still has a way to play out.